Hey, Bomb Squad. If you're a comedian or a podcaster looking for an affordable website solution with a modern look, then we recommend Puck's Hub. With a Puck's Hub website, you can set up your new website in minutes with easy-to-use pre-built templates. Puck's Hub websites are customizable and can easily be integrated with other platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. The best part? Puck's Hub plans are only $5 per month. We use Puck's Hub for our website at the Art of Bombing podcast, and we think you should too. That's why we've partnered with Puck's Hub to offer listeners a free 60-day trial. Head over to puckshub.com to subscribe and use promo code AOBPOD at checkout for your 60-day free trial, and then pay only $5 per month after that. Take your career to the next level with your own Puck's Hub website today.
Dan Bublitz Comedy Productions.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, 'cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Welcome to an all-new episode of The Art of Bombing presents Between Bombs Callbacks, where Josh and I call back the most recent episode. In today's episode, we are calling back episode 277 with Sumukh Torgalkar. And boy, was it a great conversation.
It was, indeed.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of hot topics that we talked about. He's an incredible comedian.
He is an incredible comedian. If you haven't listened to the episode, you owe it to yourself right now to hit pause. Actually, you don't even have to hit pause. We'll just wait. We'll just pause for you.
Yeah, we'll just wait. Okay.
All right. Yeah, good. You're back. I'm sure it was now you're all caught up, and Sumukh is I thought as well had a lot, just kind of life coach stuff, this guy.
Oh, absolutely. It was interesting one thing about it is, so he was headlining a show that day that I co-produce, but
Okay.
I wasn't able to go to that show. I was booked elsewhere. So I went to set up, and then I went back to help tear down. And I was hoping I would get back in time to see some of his set. But unfortunately, I did not get to see his set, but I heard, it was really good.
Yeah.
So, and I was really surprised that I hadn't run into him yet.
Yeah. Well, on YouTube, at least. Now, I should have seen this guy on YouTube. I'm a dad, so I'm constant, like everything I do is through a YouTube video. My son and I put a computer together last weekend using a YouTube video.
I just want to know, when you're watching these videos, was it on the Art of Bombing YouTube channel or account?
That's right.
That's a callback.
That is a
last
callback
year.
all its own, folks. That's right. Yeah. So just a quick recap. There was a time where my son was logging into YouTube after me not having logged out after creating bomb drops on our YouTube channel, and he would go in and just start watching Mr. Beast videos. And I show up. I'm like, you know what, Dan? Your YouTube watch history on our channel is a lot like my son. It's amazing. The coincidence has gotten me completely upended. And he's like, dude, I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly. I'm like, I barely watch YouTube videos, and if I do, it's on my own account.
Yeah, there you
for
go.
that reason.
But he does have YouTube videos. I haven't actually gone to check them out. I'm sure they will find me at some point. But it brings to life something that he brings up that I absolutely got invested in. And that's the idea that you have to measure your success when you do comedy on your own terms. In other words, you got to take the stand-up that you're doing and apply that to your life, not necessarily the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, and I think that's a great point too about, doing comedy on your own terms, because it's easy to get burnt out when you try to play the game or the politics of
Yeah.
comedy. In comedy, you end up hitting, there's a lot of, where you'll hit gatekeepers, you'll hit obstacles and things like that. And there, you'll kind of be groomed, I guess, or fostered to believe that you need to go follow this system if you want to be successful, and that's not necessarily true. There's ways around it, and I think that's important to keep in mind, because you can get burnt out when you're trying to play the game how other people tell you to play the game.
Exactly. And it, and I think that all comes from comparing yourself to another person. A lot of it does. Meaning,
Oh, absolutely.
you
That's one
you
of the
can
worst things you can do.
it is, and as soon as you do, you're basically judging yourself on that person's terms, not yours. So, why is this other comic getting time at this club and I'm not? Why is this
Yep.
other comic headlining this show and I'm featuring? And as soon as you
Yeah.
start doing that, you're basically using their measurement system on yourself. And that leads to a lot of what you were just talking about, like just your unhappiness with, you start to become jaded. And it keeps a lot of people from staying in this business is because they don't see it any other way. They look at, successful comics on, Netflix or whatever, and good for them. They have a special and that's what they're going for. But I think Sumukh has a very clear idea of what he wants to do, and he's living it on his terms. And he's saying, I want to educate people and be able to help them and be funny doing it.
Yep.
I identified with that super well.
Oh, yeah. Well, and in addition to that, it goes back to what we talked about last week about, doing comedy adjacent things.
Yeah.
It's him, doing comedy on his own terms means, doing his YouTube videos, making them humorous, making them so they're, helping people. But that's also comedy adjacent, because now he's building a fan base on YouTube through this other channel of, content.
Right.
That, and that again, that helps. It all kind of it's all kind of symbiotic and kind of works together, to ultimately get to, wherever your own goals are. And I find it, it's interesting that you picked this topic today, because I just had a text conversation this afternoon with a friend of the show about this very thing, where I'm getting frustrated myself. I'll admit it. I'm getting frustrated because of this exact same thing. I'm seeing comedians getting, headlining spots, and I'm getting asked to like open or feature and it's frustrating because of, I have actual credits, I have experience, and, all the things. But this conversation is good because it's a good, like, hey, Dan, you need to stop comparing. Just focus on things. Maybe you'd get booked more if you actually reached out.
Yeah.
It's, you got to find the problem to the solution to the problem is probably, just not being lazy.
Yeah.
In my case.
and in that example, you probably see some things in someone else that you'd like that sort of hold up. You use that to sort of reflect on yourself, and you've decided, look, I maybe there are some things I need to do to be more like what that person is doing, and I'm making an objective decision to make some changes so that I can help my own career. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but when I listen to a comic like Sumukh, I hear somebody say, I'm not going to comedy clubs. I'm not trying to go to comedy clubs. I play them sometimes, but it's not my goal to headline clubs. That's not where I am. I'm building my following elsewhere, and I'm going to where those people are. And that's how I'm defining my career. And, I think that if every comic, holds themselves to, I'm going to go to comedy clubs and I'm going to use the same template that everybody has to be successful, then you're not taking his advice. You're not taking Sumukh's advice, which is
Yep.
the industry's changing. And so the standards by which, you're being measured are changing as well. And I think you're tone deaf if, you're trying to make it as a comic using somebody else's measuring tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think it's to kind of add on to that, it's also important to, kind of set goals, like he's very clear that his goal is not to work in comedy clubs.
Yeah.
And if, and so he's working on building a following. And that's something we, as comedian, in order to do comedy on your terms, you need to be able to book your shows and then get people to come to them shows, what doesn't matter what the venue is. And in order to do that, you do have to build, some sort of a following or a fan base so that when you go book independently, you have all the creative control. There's another comic who's been on the podcast, Zoltan, who, he's a really great comedian, very strong comedian, turns out material like nobody's business, is just always writing new stuff. He's been releasing his own specials on YouTube. He had a popular dry bar comedy special. Then he's been releasing stuff he's on YouTube, building his fan base on social media. And now, I mean, he still works clubs and stuff, and I'm sure, that's part of his goals. But a lot of the shows that he does, he goes to towns, rents a theater himself, and sells these theater. He does his own marketing. He does everything pretty much himself and then sells them out. And one of the benefits of being able to do that is not only is he doing comedy on his own terms, he's also probably making more money than if he, what he can make in one night doing a show like that, he'd probably make in a weekend at a regular club somewhere in the Midwest,
Yeah.
So you when you take your creative control like that and use your following to book your shows and do your own tours and stuff like that, you also put more financial control. You have more you basically have more say in how much you're getting paid and how much you're paying for things. You got more financial decisions that you can make.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, don't we all want that? I mean,
Yeah.
that's really to make as much money as we can doing comedy so we can pay our bills.
Yeah, that's essentially what you're going for. I mean, and it may not be that somebody has a financial goal in mind with comedy, and that's okay too. But if your goal is to make a living, then that has to be part of it.
Absolutely. And I think kind of going back to last week again, and this, because it ties into this week as well, doing comedy on your own terms and having those other comedy adjacent channels. I think it's important that, like, especially if you want to build a following on whether it's YouTube or TikTok or social media of any sort, yes, you need to put an occasional stand-up clip out there. But I think if you really want to build an audience, you need to look at like what other comedians have done. Sure, there are some that blew up just because of a stand-up clip or whatever, but a lot of the people I know, in comedy who have really built an audience, it wasn't from the stand-up clips they posted. It was other content that they were creating, and Sumukh's a good example of that. He's creating YouTube videos that are, educational and funny. I have another friend who also has been on the show, Zach Lyman. He's got a new thing on TikTok that he's been doing, which is called Thrifting with Zach. And he just surpassed 25,000 followers on TikTok. And that's because he's creating, something different. It's still, he's still using his creativity. He's probably being funny in the videos and things like that.
Yeah.
But he's building something different, and that's going to bring in a different audience. And then he can then sell his comedy to those people.
Exactly. Yeah, and I identify both these last couple of episodes in Zach's example as well hit me pretty close to home, because my path here is not necessarily a traditional comedian's path. I do corporate speaking, and some of that is, some morale building and motivational type stuff it's starting to morph into. And A lot of it's the development of people in a particular craft, in my case, sales. And, to me, I refuse to accept, that somebody's 45 minutes or hour or day is just mine for me to do with as I please. It's their time. And I owe it to them to make it entertaining, funny, and really memorable and powerful. And at the same time, helping them. And I'm using the things that I learn on the comedy stage to that end. And it's helping me craft a real kind of place for me to be, like my own path. And I identify with those guys really well because I feel like they're doing something similar in helping people in another way.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to that, I would say if you're listening to this podcast and, we're talking about doing comedy on your own terms and we're talking about comedy adjacent projects, remember, it doesn't necessarily to bring a fan base into your humor. You don't necessarily have to have comedy applied and everything else, like if maybe you're a true crime fan and you want to do a true crime podcast, but you don't want it to be funny. You want it to be a serious thing. That's okay. Right. People will still, listen to your podcast. And if you build a fan base from that then gets them to come see you do stand up, they're probably still gonna, they like you. They're there for you. Exactly. So keep that in mind. Your adjacent projects don't necessarily have to be strictly comedic. I mean, it definitely helps, but it's not, it's not necessary. Now, let me ask you this, Josh. How do you maintain your love for comedy? That's what I want to know, because this kind of ties into what we're talking about. When you start looking at other people and comparing yourself to other people and, comparing, especially when you're not getting spots that you think you should, you talked about, kind of makes you bitter and angry. And then you start losing your love for comedy. So what do you how do you keep your love for comedy?
Yeah, a good question.
Do you take it out on a date to refresh the spark?
Rekindle the romance. My comedy and I have both gone into counseling.
I was gonna say we went into couples therapy.
We go into couples therapy and we get it all out there. When you say I feel, that kind of stuff. But that's a good topic and a good question. And for me, I take comedy and I make comedy a part of my life. I don't take my life and make it a part of comedy. That sounds maybe a little abstract, but I have my own aspirations, to be a great father, be a great husband, provide a good life for my family, to provide a fulfilling career for myself. And sometimes
that sounds like somebody that should quit comedy.
Well, see, sorry, it's right on point, though. Yes, but that's exactly it, right? Like, don't you become resentful of something when it takes you away from what you really want to do?
Yep.
And I think comedy is that for a lot of comedians. Like,
oh, you're absolutely right. It really is.
Right? Like people say, well, I have to work the road. I have to be away from my family because that's how comedy works. And I want to tell jokes. Okay. Well, maybe that's the template you're following because you have aspirations for your comedy career that are no longer in line for the aspirations that you have for yourself, to maintain your self-worth, your identity, and who you are. And I think being able to stay happy with it and not jaded, the secret to that is just thinking about how is by following what you want to do that's essentially true to who you are as a person, as an individual, and then figuring out, second, how do I make comedy that? Because if we put so much of our value in comedy, then we're putting our value in a role, right?
Yep.
Roles can be things like father, brother, student, fry cook, driver, Uber driver, whatever, right? And I have up days and down days on those things. Same with comedy. But with me, there's no other me. No one's better than me at me. I'm always at a 10 at me. And a lot of times if I'm not doing well in comedy, then I let that drag me down. And I think it's easy to get jaded with something when we put so much of our own self-worth into a role or something that we do. And so that's the secret for me, Dan.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I do a little differently. And these are some things that I, just, off the top of my head, when I started getting jaded about comedy, I'm not afraid to take a break. If you need, take a break from doing comedy, take a break from social media, go do something else. If you want to rekindle that flame, sometimes just taking a little break, little me time, go you do other things that you enjoy, because that'll help, just revitalize you just as a person and in general in everyday life. And that then reflects, and ultimately reflects on your comedy. Take a little vacation where it's not comedy related, or go to a sports game, or, go see some live music, or whatever, whatever you
Yeah.
might be into. If you're, read comic books or whatever. That's one thing I do. I read comic books. But another thing that I do that helps refresh my my love for comedy is by going and watching live comedy. That
Okay.
I'm not like supporting other shows.
Great.
Sometimes just going and watching another show and seeing, you, because then you start getting that, you're like, damn, I wish I was on this show. This crowd's hot. These comics are great. And so it
Yeah.
like really reignites that fire, because then you're like, okay, I need to get back on the saddle, because I want to be a part of the next one.
Yeah.
So that's that would be my trick. If you're getting burnt out and you're getting bitter about comedy, take a break,
Yeah.
or
Go support your scene.
and go support your scene.
You're totally right, man. That is totally right. And I get that same feeling too.
Yeah. I
And
guarantee you, if you go to a show and it's a hot show, you're gonna get the feeling's gonna be like you're gonna get that feeling of, damn, I wish I was on this show.
yeah, and you get to put some aesthetic distance between yourself and what comedy is, right? So all of a sudden you get to witness the good things about it.
Mm-hmm.
And
you should. Oh, go ahead.
And it fires you up, like you said. The greatest gift is just showing up to a show, and this has happened to me multiple times. I'm just there as an audience member. The showrunner's like, "Oh, yeah, hey, come up and do 10 minutes."
Yep, come do a guest spot. Somebody
come do guest spot, and you destroy
Yep.
at a show you just went to see. Yeah, that's a great feeling.
Oh, absolutely. And I will say this, just to add to that, if you do that, if you go support another show, don't go with a negative mindset.
Yeah.
You got to get out of, it's important that you have to get out of your comedy brain, your comedian brain of, you're not going as a comedian, because then you're going to see these comedians doing well and it's a hot show. And then you start getting jealous. You got to stop that. You got to just go as a comedy fan. And then that's the key important part there, is that you got to go as a comedy fan. You loved comedy. That's why you got into it. So go support a show as a comedy fan. And if it's a hot show, it's going to rekindle your flame. But you just got to make sure you don't do it in a negative way. So you don't leave the show going, oh, I should have been on that show. How come I didn't get booked? I'm going to go home and cry now.
Yeah, and I've turned into a cartoon coal miner as well. That's depressing. It's something that's cry aboutable.
Right. Well, this has been a great episode of the Callbacks. Thank you guys so much for listening, tuning in every week. We'll be back next week with an all brand new episode, brand new regular episode, brand new Callbacks. In the meantime, make sure you're following us on our social media, Art of Bombing Pod, on all platforms. You can go to the website artofbombingpod.com to find all of those. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to wherever, or follow the podcast wherever you listen to the podcast. And most importantly, if you really get something out of this, it would help us a tremendous amount if you would share this podcast with another comedian who might gain something from it. We're really trying to build something here and give give back to the comedy community. So
And here's something specific you can do. If you got something out of this episode or the episode that it's talking about, take a link and drop it into the Facebook group on your scene. Most of you listening to this have Facebook groups on your scene. Do that. It helps us a ton.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week.
This has been a Dan Bublitz comedy production. Roar.